Good morning, everyone. We'll start things off here. This morning we have three speakers. We'll start out with Steve Stepik. He's from CATS. Steve is the Executive Director of the Kalamazoo Area Transportation Study, the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Kalamazoo area. Steve will be discussing non-motorized project selection, funding, and the overall federal transportation planning process. Steve has 20 years.
Is it? Yeah, it's on.
Hear me okay? Okay. Thank you. Steve has 20 years of planning experience, with the last 15 focused on transportation. He is the current chair of the Michigan Transportation Planning Association and a certified professional planner. Steve is also an adjunct professor at Grand Valley State University and Western Michigan University, where he teaches transportation planning. And then following Steve's presentation, we'll have Bruce Kodsbon. Bruce is from the Michigan Department of Transportation. And Bruce's background is that he is the unit supervisor of the local agency program, Rural and Enhancement Program. As part of that role, he reviews funding applications for grant funding for the Transportation Alternative Program, otherwise short TAP, for projects including streetscapes, non-motorized pathways, and the Safe Routes to the Schools program. He also oversees LAP staff engineers and consultants in delivering those projects to advertisement and bidding. Bruce's presentation is going to center on tips for local agencies to consider, both when they are applying for federal funding to use in constructing non-motorized pathways, as well as some additional hints and best practices to consider when designing those projects. And concluding for us with his presentation is our very own Ryan Mikas, our county engineer. And Ryan is going to cover the non-motorized map that we put together here roughly about 6 months ago, and go over some finer points of how we arrived at that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bruce, or I'm sorry, to Steve. Thank you.
All right, well, we'll see if this works. I'm gonna move whoever cell phone that is out of the way. That way I don't break it.
That's fine.
All right, oh, maybe I will break it.
And I don't mean to hover, I'm just.
Making sure everything works. That's not a problem. I gotta figure out where I'm going.
We put the TV there.
No, that's good. Then I'm just gonna sit here and stare like this, but, all right, so let's get started. So we're gonna do kind of an overview for those that aren't familiar with CATS. Since I recognize probably about 90% of your faces, I hope you guys recognize and understand who CATS is. So we'll talk about that and kind of that federal process a little bit. Then we'll get into funding, overall funding, and into specifically TAP funding, right? And then we'll talk about a little bit about the CATS overall selection process and the process that we go through before we get to the point of programming projects. Right, so when we talk about transportation planning, we're here as staff, CATS staff here, we're providing the information, the tools, and the public involvement needed so that we can look at alternative strategies for improving the system, right? The overall goal, I think the overall number one goal in our Metropolitan Transportation Plan is how do we improve the system, right? We want to see improvement in the system, whether that's condition, road condition, bridge condition, transit condition, non-motorized condition, facilities. We want to improve the system. So MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, right? It's important to remember that an MPO is here with the authority of federal law. So that's a fun part. So we don't have anybody from MDOT here today other than Bruce, and Bruce is okay because he already knows all this stuff, which is the fun part somewhat. If for those that are on my policy committee, is a good reminder that with that authority of federal law, that the policy board for the CATS MPO has the authority to deny MDOT funds too. So as through the planning process, if there is a project that the MPO board doesn't agree with that uses federal funds that is an MDOT project, they can decide to not pursue that project. Now, has that happened? A couple times. Has it ever led to an actual project not happening? No. What it does do is gives an opportunity usually for local government to get a better involvement in the project. And we've had several examples of a project that's come forward that has said, we're not going to include non-motorized facilities in that project. Good example is the redesign of Stadium Drive at 131. The original design did not include the pathway. The MPO refused to put it in our transportation improvement program, which kicked it back into the design process, and there's now a path along that. So that's an opportunity through the MPO process to kind of steer that. So CATS is the MPO for the Kalamazoo Metropolitan Area. It is a policymaking and planning body. If you really want to look at the US code for that, anywhere in the US where there's more than 50,000 people, by law, there has to be an MPO, or you cannot receive federal transportation funding. And that not only includes highway side, that also includes transit, right? So at over 200,000 people, kind of you get a bump up and you get a bunch more requirements, a bunch more political hoops you have to jump through. You'd be considered a transportation management area. CATS is a transportation management area currently. It'll be interesting as we get a release this summer of our new urbanized population. With new definitions, we may drop below 200. It all depends. We're a growing area, but the way they're defining the urban areas is changing. So that might change. The one thing that won't change though is Federal Highway, Federal Transit, and MDOT say that once you're a TMA, transportation management area, you're always a TMA. So we'll still have to jump through the hoops, which is always the awkward thing of government is we'll have to jump through the hoops, but we might not get the same funding to do those hoops. So we'll have to wait and see. Right, so when we talk about investment, we're allocating scarce funding resources, right? So we'll talk about this through the planning process in a little bit and how we allocate funds. We're trying to achieve outcomes and vision, right, for the region, but we don't have enough money. I think everybody probably in here understands that. We don't have enough money to do everything that we want. So what are we doing to kind of facilitate that collaboration between governments, interested parties, residents to get the best bang for our buck, right? 3C transportation process was established in the 1960s when the first MPO started, and it is still in the legislation, a comprehensive, cooperative, and continuing transportation planning process. So that is why the MPO is here. So there's a map showing there's a lot of MPOs in the States, 14 of them in Michigan, smallest one is Midland, biggest one is the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments. Half the state's population is within SEMCOG, so there's a lot of difference between 1.5 staff at Midland versus a couple hundred people that work at SEMCOG. So when we talk about CATS, this is what we're talking about. All right, so everything in that yellow area, so any jurisdiction within that, whether that's city, village, or other road commissions, road departments, if they receive federal funds, it has to go through the CATS process. Now there are different funding pots, and we won't get into that a little bit here. Depending on the area that you're in, there's rural planning, the rural task force, which is established by the state. So if there's a rural job that is programmed through that rural task force within the MPO boundary, it still has to go through the MPO, because if we remember that hierarchy here of that federal down to state, down to local, CATS is just under that federal, right? Small urban funding for the Paw Paw Lawton also then, if it's programmed through that small urban process, has to go through the CATS process to ultimately get the funding. So anything within that yellow has to go through the CATS process if it receives federal dollars. All right, make sense? All right, so we're there to establish that setting, fair and impartial, evaluate alternatives, right? There's a bunch of other legal functions that we have to perform, documents. We're going to talk about two of them, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Transportation Improvement Program. So the Metropolitan Transportation Plan is our big vision document, right? This looks at our system investment priorities and plans out 25 years. Our current plan goes out a little further because we just updated it, goes out to 2050. So we are looking at all modes at the system level. So we're not looking at necessarily, hey, this road needs a chip seal, or crack seal or potholes. We're looking at the system level over that time frame at large scale projects. What do we need to do? With that focus being on the intermodal. So we're including non-motorized, we're including transit, we're including how we're getting to the airport, talking about freight. All of that is included in there. So we link regional land use patterns, development, housing, employment, and local plans. You know, we have the sometimes awkwardness in the state of Michigan between who is vested in land use authority in the state, right? Does everybody know who's vested with land use authority in the state of Michigan? Yes, no? Cities, townships, villages, right? Who owns roads in rural areas outside of cities and villages? Road commissions. So we have that kind of a wall sometimes that hopefully through the MPO process we can bridge, right? Because a road commission is concerned about roads, right? Transportation. Land use isn't their job. That's a township's job or a city and village job. Cities and villages, they own all of it, right? So they already can have that tied together. So the other part of that, so we have this big vision out through 2050, then we have our transportation improvement program. So this is our implementation tool in the federal planning process. So this is where we receive our allocation of dollars, and this is where we program them, right? So we do a 4-year program. We update it every 3 years so that there's 1 year of overlap. For those of you that are involved in project planning, you know that it takes a long time to go through the design process and the environmental clearance now, especially. All of these steps. So having that 1 year overlap allows a local agency to have funding that is reasonably assured so that they can start that process before actual construction. So it's not a wish list, although there is a wish list in our TIP document. If you go to the back, we have what we call our illustrative list, which shows you the other 100 and some odd $1 million worth of money and projects that we don't have enough money to do compared to what we are programming. So then that authority though of the MPO is that what my policy committee votes on and says, yes, this is in the TIP, automatically goes into the state transportation improvement program without change. MDOT can't do anything to it. It's illegal for MDOT to change those projects once they're, because that is the authority vested in federal law. All right. So those two documents, and the reason why I bring those up is that one, that's our vision, where we have our non-motorized section of our plan. You've probably seen the maps or read through that section. And then we have our implementation tool, right? Our tip of how we actually fund those projects. So we kind of have that step, and having your projects in those two is important. So when we talk about funding, this is a lot of new stuff. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, are often referred to now as the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Recently passed. A lot of the stuff is still trickling down as far as rules and regulations, but it is a pretty sizable increase in funding for the area. And it's also adding some new stipulations, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So the program is authorized through 2026. Everybody understands the difference between appropriation and authorization, right? So authorization is our big picture of, hey, here's the total dollar values we want to see in each of these years, and here's the program. We still have to wait every year for Congress to actually appropriate those dollars. And if you know that we just got a few weeks ago actually appropriated through the end of the year, which makes things, especially in Bruce's areas, a little bit tricky when we're talking about money flowing from the federal government. And we have to divide it up by days of the year, and we only get so much money until they appropriate through the year. But we are good through the rest of this year. So, you know, we're out paving and building and everything without any issues, right? So $477 billion in highway, transit, and railway programs, which is a 56.4% increase over the FAST Act, which was our last federal transportation authorization. All right, so then we talked about cities, villages, right, and road commissions as Public Act 51 agencies, right? Everybody knows what Public Act 51 is, right? That's our state law that distributes transportation dollars. Who is not an Act 51 agency? Townships. Again, that's where we have that, you know, land use authority, but then roads. So that coordination factor is part of the reason we're here today, right? And that cooperation factor. So Public Act 51 also decides how MDOT distributes federal dollars. People usually concentrate on the formula that divides up Act 51 dollars to cities, villages, whatever, the 83 county road departments, and MDOT, right? And that proportions the 39.1% and all that. To me, a bigger issue that might help is the Bruce over here takes 75% of all that federal money at MDOT. Local agencies get 25% of that money. So that is stipulated in Act 51. So we're always at this adjustment at the state level of that 75-25 of how much federal dollars make it to local road agencies. So this is a flow chart from last year. This doesn't include the new IIJA. So you can see big orange boxes at the top there are those federal transportation programs. So every one of those has strings attached to those dollars, right? Eligibility requirements. Those flow down to obligation authority. Obligation authority is a percentage of the total allocation that the federal government promises to pay. Basically, it's their way to make sure that we don't spend too much. So they'll say you get 1 billion, but you can only spend 950 million of that, just to make sure. So we wait every year for Congress to give obligation authority. So then once you get past obligation authority, everything's split up, right? You see MDOT in the blue boxes. You see different rules and laws based on federal law or statewide rules and regulations that ultimately flow down. And if you look at the bottom down there on transportation management area, you see Kalamazoo. So as it sifts down through there, that's how we get our allocation of dollars that then the MPO prioritizes. Any questions? It'll be interesting. I'm excited to see the new IIJA one of this because there's a lot more different colored arrows that are going to be involved in that. So when we come about to funding, so our common funding categories on the highway side, the surface transportation program, a little over $4 million. Congestion mitigation, air quality, and our carbon reduction program, which is new in the IIJA, combined is $761,000. Transportation alternatives program in the IIJA doubled in the amount that is coming to the MPO. So we now get over $500,000. So anybody understand why I put all of these up there though for this session? Go ahead. All of these fundings can include non-motorized element. Everything that CATS receives on the highway side can be used for non-motorized. STP can be used for anything. We could build a truck museum out back with STP if we wanted to. Now there's stipulations. CMAQ is hard to spend for non-motorized. It's difficult, but it can be done. New carbon reduction program is a lot easier. It's non-motorized facilities is labeled right in the law, the new IIJA, to spend that money on non-motorized. So it comes down to how we prioritize our dollars, right? And where we put that in, we put the non-motorized into the mix. All right, so then that brings us kind of to the CATS, the project selection process. So when we talk about that, we talk about some previous planning activities that CATS did. CATS did their CATS Moves Plan 2017. It's a great document that really looks at non-motorized, particularly around transit and safety. Excuse me. And then our recently adopted 2050 Metropolitan Plan, which then takes kind of what we did in CATS Moves, throws it together with a lot of updates of local plans into an overarching non-motorized plan within the 2050. So both of these are on our website. I highly recommend that you look at them if you're doing non-motorized activity or looking to fund, because we draw our projects from those documents, right? And that's where we kind of end here, is that participation is important. For those agencies that are not participating in the CATS process, it's difficult for you to get federal funding, right? Everybody gets a seat at the table, but if you don't sit at the table, it's hard for you to get into the process, right? We do 2 different calls for projects. We do our Metropolitan Transportation Plan call for projects every 4 to 5 years. And that's that overarching where we look at facilities and really how are we connecting facilities, right? We should have a path from A to B, or we should have bike lanes from A to B. That's where we're looking at that. Then every 3 years, we do our Transportation Improvement Program call for projects, where we reference our long range plan and say, we are going to build that bike lane from A to B, or we are going to build that path to A to B, and tie that together. So when the subcommittee of our technical committee reviews project applications coming in for the TIP, we consider all the applications, right? So local agency has to be participating to understand that that call for projects is out there, right? They have to fill out an application. using the Metropolitan Transportation Plan as a guide, we kind of go through an iterative process, right? We say, hey, we want this road or this path or this bike lane from A to B. Ryan's building that road from A to B, redoing that road. That's a perfect opportunity for us to add some money to it to build the path, right? There's nothing worse than putting in that beautiful new road and then coming back in a year later to really annoy the public, right? And then have lanes shut down and build the path. It saves everyone money when we combine projects like that. So that's one of our first things is that cost saving. How can we do that? Then we kind of go through a little bit of implementation. If this is we get an application from a township that's or an agency that's never received federal dollars and wants to build a 20-mile bike path, where they're at in that process, right? Do they have all their right-of-way secured? Do they have their match dollars secured? Bruce might hit on this, but the TAP program is probably the most difficult program to program jobs in the state. Partly for those reasons, because everybody wants a beautiful path, right? Or some other facility, but we're often dealing with a lot of agencies that aren't familiar with the federal transportation process and understand the certifications that they all have to go through in Bruce's area with right-of-way and environmental clearance and everything before you can actually build. So a lot of people ask for grants and then go, wait a minute, we can't do that this year. We have to do all this other stuff, or it's going to take 2 years or 3 years, or you might be lucky enough to have a railroad going through your area. And then it takes 10, 15 years sometimes, it seems. So there's a lot of issues with the program of those dollars. So we think about implementation. And then finally, we kind of get down to this point in the CATS process where we do look at equity. We're allowed to look at funding equity across the area. So we might get the majority of our dollars figured out, combining with road projects or other goals that we have in our Metropolitan Transportation Plan. And then we might say, we haven't funded anything in Van Buren County. Let's pick this project. The new IIJA actually re-added that back into the process, so that's great. So that is also a consideration at the committees. Then ultimately our subcommittees make recommendation for these project lists to our technical committee, which then ultimately goes to our policy committee for final approval. So that was your 20-minute crash course on programming of jobs. So does anybody have questions before we let Bruce get up here?
Now that Michigan passed a law allowing for federal aid buyback,
Yes.
how do you see that affecting?
Federal aid buyback does not affect our process.
Right, but it affects the money that comes.
It does. Yeah, after our process. The way that it works is that, so we might award $1 million to the road commission for a project. And we'll be talking about this more about some of the kind of the rules that we'll want to go through. Once that gets to that point in its program through us, and they get to the point of obligation, I believe, then the road commission requests the 90 cents on the dollar, provided there's still funds available. Then MDOT takes the federal aid out of it, assigns it, but that project has to be still built to the specifications that were programmed. So it's still going through the federal process because state law can't say, no, you can't go through that federal process. Which is a great opportunity. And I know Ryan and I have had lots of conversations about this, particularly for rural agencies. The buyback program, I think, is a big benefit because they're, as I said, even in TAP jobs, dealing with the federal aid process can be a lot of labor. And for smaller agencies, rural agencies, getting that buyback can be really beneficial. So, and we have to still talk now that the law has been signed, I believe. We have to talk at our policy level about kind of, hey, what do we want to do? The one issue that was brought up is the law does allow, once that money is assigned to that project, if there's any cost savings, they're allowed to spend it on another federal aid eligible road. Normally that money would go back to CATS in that process. And I think we'll just have to talk about that I don't have a personal problem of that money going into another fix on another federal aid road, but I think we'll just have to talk about that to outline a process of what that should go through. Mark, you had your hands up?
Yeah, Steve, this is a wish for you.
A wish?
If you could magically get as much money as you needed.
Yep.
You talk about you get less than $5 million a year, and you have a wish list that's over $100 million long. So if you could get the money you needed to keep all of our infrastructure in good shape, what's the number?
I can look it up for you in our plan. Yep.
It's
I don't remember it off the top of my head. And just looking at roads, we do have that because we go through an analysis of the condition to bring everything up to a PACER rating that's positive. And that number doesn't include facilities that we don't have yet. So if we were wanting to put in paths or trails or other things, that doesn't include that. It's a lot of money. We don't, the plan itself has, is programming out 2050, we're in the billions of dollars when we look at money out that far. And we do not remotely have enough money. And we know that just for those that participate in the process, we do receive that about $5 million a year on the roadside, similar amount on the transit side that we program. We push in probably about 45, 50 projects that were applied for our 3-year TIP that are not getting funded. Pushing probably about 10 to 15 non-motorized specific projects that applied for TAP funds that are not getting funded. So we have a long list, which is great that we have that list because those that when we did receive COVID relief dollars, we were able to spend that money quite quickly because we had already gone through our process and picked projects. So it's helpful to know, but it also does, I think to Mark's point, shows how much more of a need we actually have. Everybody's cheering, at a 57% increase in federal dollars coming down, but it's still not remotely enough, especially if we continue operating the way that we've traditionally operated in some of our southern states that are still expanding highways left and right and doing other things and haven't shifted to a preservation mode. Any other questions? Go ahead.
It seems like major push for getting from the planning of the MTP to, let's say, paint level road occurs in the TIP process. And that relies on various players, for the commission, cities, whatnot, in case of non-motorized, to really want non-motorized and make sure that that gets from the planning phase to whatever.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we can't score or fund anything if they don't ask for it, right? That makes that hard for us to, I can't go to Schoolcraft and say, you have to build this. I don't have any authority to do that. We can say, we'd really like you to build this if you'd apply for it. It's in our plan. It's a connection that we want. It's much more carrot than stick when it comes to it, right? Again, we can't, same on the roadside, we can't force anybody to repave a road. We can say, we prioritize these roads higher than others that should get money, but we can't force anybody to do it. But thankfully, everybody else wants money and they'll happily take it if somebody doesn't want it. So it always gets spent.
So a key feature then is that's going to sort of tip our area toward greater emphasis on non-motorized is
that participation is important, that first bullet. Yep, go ahead, Mark.
Would it be fair to say that CATS only reacts if you can't initiate?
Well, we do initiate it to an extent. We can, and we've done that with multiple, particularly MDOT jobs. We've said, hey, we would like you to do this with the job. We do that same thing with reference to a lot of other jobs. The recent Cork Streets road diets, for anybody that's driven on Cork north of here, where that was road diet with bike lanes, that was CATS 15 years ago saying the Cork Street corridor would be a perfect non-motorized corridor east to west and put it in our plan. And that's what slowly then gets implemented.
I think in addition to that is things like CATS moves and the most recent MTP when you folks help facilitate having a standalone chapter on non-motorized. And that, I think that sets a good tone that allows for those desires to come to service.
Well, and I'll give a little bit of going into this year. One of the changes in the new transportation bill is Federal Highway would like us to have a complete streets implementation plan, which kind of takes non-motorized to a next level. Does everybody heard the term complete streets? So figuring out how we're going to tie non-motorized with our normal road program into a combination of implementing a complete streets philosophy is something that we're going to have to think about. That now Federal Highway, so you can kind of see more top-down change coming down for us to start to look at. Mark had another question, and then I've probably been talking too long. And Bruce,
No, I'm good. It was actually kind of an audio video thing. When people ask questions from the audience, if you could repeat the question.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're
Now that I'm done, I'll happily do that, Mark.
So for everybody else, if you could repeat
Yep.
the question, it'll help us capture it. Thank
All
you.
right. Any more questions? All right. You're up, Bruce.
Thank you. I'm Bruce Cosbon. Again, as Dean mentioned, I'm the unit supervisor for the local agency Rural and Enhancement Group in Lansing, based in the Development Services Division. I've been at this for a bunch of years. Sometimes it seems like it's too long, but other times it seems like it's a walk in the park. To follow up on your question earlier about the buyout, stay tuned. There's a lot of information that we have to figure out yet. I'm sitting on a couple of committees that are developing the buyout language or the buyout requirements in cooperation with MDOT planning and with all the MPOs, so that we are relying on, we are going to be relying quite a bit on the help from the MPOs, from different task forces and agencies in order to come up with that buyout discussion. My guess is that buyout is going to be hugely popular. Steve has outlined some items that, excuse me, in his program that gives you the idea there's a bunch of strings attached to the money. Yep. There's a bunch more strings attached to my money. Yep. But you know what? If you go with a buyout program, I'm not a shill. I'm not telling you what to do. Okay. But if you go with a buyout program, a lot of those strings disappear. Just saying. My guess is it's going to be pretty popular. The program, the bylaw is $25 million for the first fiscal year, $35 million that MDOT can buy out for the second fiscal year, and $45 million from there on forward. So that and it's 90-cent dollars. But keep your ears open to pay attention. There's a lot more information that's going to come. Again, whoops, let's go the right way this time. LAP is housed in the MDOT's Development Services Division. Larry Doyle is the administrator there. That group is divided up into three sections. The one I'm in is the local agency programs, with Tracy Likes as a supervisor there. It's further broken into the rural, the local bridge, and the urban group. Most all of you, I think, have had some experience with all three of those groups, so that it's in my little world, it's a good relationship. I know there's some rocks and some bumps some days between Steve and me, but other days those paths are kind of smooth. But for what we're talking about here today, what I'm going to talk about is kind of drilling down a little bit on what Steve was talking. Steve was talking about federal aid as it results, as it's affected by, as it affects the entire federal aid as it affects the Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm here to talk about the TAP program, the Transportation Alternative Program. We have one of my staff engineers is Landon Johnson, who has worked with the Road Commission and with some of you all on some TAP funded projects over the last few years. Landon has statewide responsibility for projects that are funded with the TAP funds. We do have some history. I've been in this spot since for about 16 years now. Actually, one of the first projects I was working with when I came to MDOT was finishing up a phase of the Calhaven Trail and working with Dick Skalski and some other folks excuse me, over in Kalamazoo, in the city of Kalamazoo, on Western Gateway improvements. Those had some strings attached, but we got through it. And to the point where we must have done something right, because Road Commission and the city keep coming, they keep wanting to work with us for more projects. For example, the River Valley Trail, 6 phases for that project. the Portage Creek Trailway. We had another project several years ago over in Texas Township along Texas Drive. We also have several projects that are CATS funded for the TAP program. In addition to these 5 or 6 projects I listed here, we've also done a lot of work over in Lawton, over in Lawrence, over in Augusta, Schoolcraft, Vicksburg, pretty much all of Southwest Michigan. And the result of that work is shown, it's just kind of evidenced here on this map I'm showing now. And get yourself a copy of this map. It's up at the front desk. So, but the TAP program has proven to be extremely popular. That I still play hockey. There are a bunch of guys I play with who, as part of their training, ride bikes. I live in Grand Rapids. Well, these guys, they'll get on their bike from Grand Rapids. They'll come over to St. Joe, over to South Haven, St. Joe, on their bikes to get on the Calahaven Trail, come across over here because it's a good aerobic training exercise for them. My goal is, and the goal is not too far away. I'll be able to get on my bike in Grand Rapids and take that bike all the way through over to eventually to New Buffalo as part of that. Whatever we're calling it, Red Arrow Highway Trail or Blue Star Trail or something or other. But, and then if they want to take a side trip, I can get on to Calahaven and go easterly over, I think, to Port Huron. It's that awesome. I don't know if my bike can stand it. I don't know if my legs can stand it. But anyway, there are a lot of projects. The program is popular. It's getting a lot of use. It started off as a result of the old enhancement set aside in 1992 in ICE-T, the old, the original Highway Trust, not the original, one of the old Highway Trust Fund bills, and the program has grown since then. Just so you know, that in fiscal 21, the local agency program unit delivered over 450 projects for about, whatever that number is, $645 million. Of that total, Landon had 45 projects that were TAP funded, which includes Safe Routes to Schools. And the total was about a little less than $11 million of federal aid in those projects, about $16 million total. Here's one of the reasons why Steve and I are here talking today. Federal funds come with strings. Federal FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, has delegated the responsibility for pulling those strings or pushing those strings or taking care of those strings. They've developed, they've administered, they've delegated that responsibility to MDOT. We don't care how you play the game or how the game is played, but we've been on the receiving end of a couple good paddywhacks from FHWA for some projects that haven't performed well. All the strings weren't done right, and there's been several instances of local agencies losing their federal aid. We don't want to go there. So our goal is pretty simple. It's to help preserve the federal funds. We want to see as many federal dollars as possible be moved to a project to successfully complete the project. My goal, what's my goal, Ryan? For every project is make every project the best project ever. Don't think about the one before, think about the one moving forward. How do we reach our goal? Meetings like this, we have webinars and presentations. We meet regularly with a lot of our partners at FHWA, the County Road Association, the planning organizations. Steve mentioned the rural task forces. Yeah, we meet with them and several other groups within MDOT. Also, as we've done here multiple times, we'll meet individually with local agencies and their consultants as you get ready to start your project or during the design of the project. We do have a website that we maintain. There it is. It's kind of ugly, but it works. It's in the process of being revamped to make it maybe a little less ugly, but it'll still work. It's at, oh, the picture's hiding the web link, but it's michigan.gov/MDOT-LAP. We have a lot of information on that site. We also have a listserv that we try to put something out with current information on once or twice a week. You can register for that listserv by going to the bottom left area of the LAP website, signing up, and get those registrations. Steve mentioned the importance of that wall between the County Road Commission, the villages, and townships. That's huge. That wall was set up in 1951 as part of Public Acts 51 that defined that the cities, villages, and county road commissions or road departments are eligible to receive federal aid. Nobody else is. Townships aren't, the parks departments aren't, the focus groups aren't. We can receive it indirectly. There's ways around that, and we'll cover that. But because of that requirement, MDOT can only work. We have a contractual relationship with those Act 51 agencies, so that's who we're working with. We'll hold Road Commission responsible for any project for implementing projects out in townships or unincorporated villages or areas like that. For the TAP-funded project, the Transportation Alternative Program projects, the projects need to be located within a public right-of-way, but not on a roadway. There's a little bit of a difference there. We can work in a public roadway. We'll come back to that. We can work in public road rights-of-way, not in a roadway, basically from back a curb across street to back a curb. We're out of that. We're in every place else in the right-of-way. We can work in public easements, dedicated easements for these non-motorized pathways, for example. We have a lot of them. We can work there every day, all day. As Steve mentioned, we can combine TAP funded projects with other road projects. That's a good way to get the bang for the buck. You got the economy of scale. You have one contractor working on the site. You got one set of barricades. Ryan only gets one set of phone calls because the customers are mad because they can't get to wherever they got to go. But we do have some flexibility in those projects. We do have some design requirements, though, that we insist on for non-motorized pathways. What we're talking about here, AASHTO, which is the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials guidance, doesn't require, but they really, really, really strongly want a pathway to be at least 10 feet wide with a paved surface and two 2-foot shoulders, one set of shoulders on each side of that pathway. That changed a little bit over the last 20 years. For a while, we were allowing maybe 8-foot wide pathways, but the argument there was, gee, the 10 feet is the guidance. We should stay with 10 feet because we're hearing nobody's going to use this. Well, now we're hearing 10 feet's not wide enough. 14 feet might be wider because more and more people, my buddies, the hockey players, will ride in a gang. Well, not a gang, but they're riding in a bunch, and they'll take up that 10-foot wide space. Or if my wife and I have the 3 kids out riding on our bikes, well, they're grandkids now, but 5 of us on bikes on that pathway are going to take up a lot of space. So that's the reason why we want at least the 10-foot wide pathway. When we come across wetlands or come across stream crossings or that sort of thing where we need boardwalks or bridges, the requirement there is that those structures be at least 14 feet of clear distance inside on top of that boardwalk or on a structure to make sure we have that the carrying capacity for the 14 feet. For the ADA requirements, for the American Disabilities Act requirements, we do require at least a minimum of 5-foot sidewalk clear width and provide access to buildings. This comes into play because not only does a TAP program pay for non-motorized pathways, it can pay for streetscape work, sidewalk improvements, decorative lights, other amenities, trash receptacles, bike racks, those sorts of things. So, but we do need to make sure that if for those cases, we need to make sure we have enough clear space, we have enough width, enough separation so that everybody can use these facilities all the time. And that's another key thing, especially run into with safe routes to schools funded projects that would want to have some sort of a pathway on the schools. Federal requirements do not allow blocking or closing off that structure or that facility. It needs to be open all the time to everybody. You can't prohibit users. You can't prohibit. You can't put guide rails, or you can't close them because they have to be accessible to everybody. Now, we talked enough about program. How do you get this money? There are two basic funding pots for TAP. Steve mentioned one of them. He mentioned the CATS, or the MPO TAP funds. In this MPO, he's got a little over $500,000 a year. Statewide is the other pot. That's about $20 million per year. That $20 million is fully committed for fiscal 22 and fiscal 23 each. It's about 60% committed for fiscal 24, which isn't a bad thing. It kind of fits into the planning process as far as how we get those funds spent correctly. There are some federal requirements. The three of the strings are we need a match. That actually, I think the CATS funds need match too, right? So the match is at least 80%. I'm sorry, the match is at least 20%, varying by project. I don't know, Steve, if CATS has that 20%, or if you encourage more. But statewide, the average match is somewhere between 30 and 35% of local funds to the federal funds. Steve mentioned the popularity of the program. I mentioned here earlier that this $20 million is pretty much committed for fiscal 22 and fiscal 23. There are some projects that were in that committed area that had match way over match, maybe 50%. One project had 75% local match. They wanted they needed the federal funds. That I don't want to say badly, but they felt the need that they could leverage the 25% federal funds if they added 75 cents on their dollar. Oh, we're going the wrong way. So how we aren't going to talk about. I missed my cue. Show me one. How do you get this money? If you're talking about the CATS $500,000, you see Steve. If you talk about the $20 million statewide, you see either your city manager or your somebody in contract authority at the city, or you see Ryan, because we need an Act 51 agency to deal with all these projects. For projects that are in townships, townships should be talking with Road Commission. Road Commission can apply for the grant funds. How they do that is working through a software system called the Michigan Grant System. How clunky is it? It's clunky. No, it's clunky. No, it's clunky, but it works for what we're doing. This is just.
I'll interrupt for 1 second. The MPOs, since there's that 20 million that goes to MPOs, 20 million, the MPOs are currently working to not have to use that grant system to program our jobs with the state. So we've been in discussions about that.
Clunky in the terms of I use it. It's difficult. And it's time consuming. But the process for the grant is probably 6 to 8 months as far as when the application is received to when it's finally acted on. Each application needs all the items shown on this list. Need a good definition of the project, where it is, what it wants to do, what the goals are, what the hopes are for accomplishment, what the schedule for implementation is. Part of the application that we would like to have some information, as much information as we can get as far as what the project includes. So we're looking for, like I say, that project description. We're looking for an overall bird's eye view of where the project is located. Maybe drill down a little bit to where to show the location, the limits from street A to street B, We'd like an itemized construction cost estimate. We aren't going to fund a project just $1 million. Mr. Cosbon needed $1 million for TAP funds. Please fund it. Well, we don't. We might have done that 20 years ago. We don't do that anymore. We do need evidence of a fully funded project, so that if a local agency is coming into us and says that they need $1 million for the project and they're proposing $500,000 of TAP funds, we want to know where the other $500,000 is coming from. And for the TAP funds that we're talking about here, the TAP is only covering construction costs. So all the other soft costs associated with developing the project, the permit application, the permit, whatever the recording is, the easement acquisition, whatever sort of funding you have to go through to get your local match, whether it's a DDA or a TIFA, or if some other DNR trust fund or a special assessment or something. We'd like to know that because those funds have to be in place before we have to have a commitment for those funds before we'll issue a conditional commitment. Then what happens is, you've heard the phrase, you don't want to see laws made or sausage. It's laws made or sausage ground. Now we're into the sausage process that the MGS will accept the application. There's an application review team that'll look at that application. That team is, depending on the application, it can be 30 people long, but I think it always includes the applicable MPO representative. If it doesn't, let me know.
No, it doesn't.
Okay. And the comments that we're looking for from the MPO are similar to what Steve mentioned in his presentation. Does this project fit the MPO plan? Is it something that's needed? We rely on the MPO for a lot of information. As part of that sausage grinding process, we end up with some comments and revisions back to Ryan or to the applicant, and then eventually we'll get to a funding commitment. That's your goal point. That means that we're ready to start receiving the whatever plans, whatever bidding documents you have to get them to land, and then we'll start working through the project. We require patience. Again, this process can be 6 to 9 months long. So if you're planning on getting a project built in fiscal 24 with TAP funds, the time is now to make that application. 6 to 9 months from submittal of the application to commitment is not unusual, but we very rarely get the approvals done in 2 or 3 months. It's more trending. I think, Steve, there's something past 9 months. It could be out a year or so by the time that we get the final commitment. But it's rewarding. We got the carrot on the stick is we got $20 million available that could go toward these projects. There is some internal guidance that we have that we generally, the program generally does not want to take all $20 million and put it in one area. There are some internal requirements for geographic distribution, some consideration for how previous projects were delivered, or if no projects were delivered. We want to see every project succeed. So for some of those projects, as Steve mentioned, where we might see that local agency or that applicant once every 4 or 5 years, we are going to handhold that. We're going to give as many constructive comments or criticisms as we can. We're going to offer to meet with you during the application process. We're going to offer to meet again after conditional commitment, but before design. We want to see the project succeed, because otherwise, what's the sense of putting $20 million out there for a program? There are some deal breakers once we get to a funding commitment. As Steve mentioned, the projects do need to be approved in the current TIP. The project documents that Ryan sends us needs to match the application. In other words, the location needs to be the same. The limits of the work, the type of work, all need to be consistent. Another showstopper is they don't have all the right permits in place, or the environmental certification isn't done. Steve kind of touched on, he said if you got a railroad in your project or something like that, and I saw some people want to put their, yeah, get out of here because the railroads are tough. It's, if you got a railroad in your project, you're going to add some time to the project. So
We only picked that projects that have railroads involved. That's where we're really into that, apparently. That's it.
But a caution there is that once the TAP funds are committed, that's generally the limit. So during the application stage, one of the hats I wear is reviewing these applications from an engineering standpoint, including does the job look reasonable? Does it look buildable? Does it look affordable? Is the are the dollars there enough? So some of my comments might be maybe insulting, but it would be, hey, go back and take a look at that boardwalk price, or go back and take a look at what you have for the HMA price, because based on what I see, it might be low. And if it's low, if you want to stay with this low price, good, but we're giving you the opportunity to increase it or to at least look at it, because once the commitment gets issued, that's it. Which means we're sitting here in March of 22, talking about projects that could get delivered in March of 24, maybe 25. You might want to take a, if you're into us with the $50 a ton for HMA in fiscal 22, you might want to take a look at that for fiscal 24, because that's probably not going to happen. But the danger there is if you stay at that 50, if you tell us that, yep, we're good at those prices, we're going to lock them in.
$5 million you're talking about, that's statewide?
Statewide.
That's not a whole lot of money, is it?
No, it's just like the land that did 40 some projects last year. That's only about $450, maybe $500,000 a project. So we're now that's just the federal aid portion. So that's why more and more local agencies are leveraging their funds, with some other trust funds or some other foundation funds.
Given the terms and conditions of going through a project and going through TAP, in your experience, is there sort of a sweet spot where if your project is a little below this amount, and it's too much hassle, or if it's above such and such amount, it's just, you should go for a different source? Is there a sweet spot dollar-wise for projects that would go through this process in your experience?
Mark, so that you don't give me one of these scowls and tell me to repeat the question. I'll try to summarize the question. Is there some sweet spot or some ultimate or some general target area for a project size we're looking at, right?
Is it worth it if you're going for a project that's $10,000? Or is it just ridiculous if you're going for a project that's $5 million? On a local basis in our area, given all the way the money is divided and so forth.
Currently, the next round of applications are going to be reviewed at the end of April. Currently, I've got applications, one for a project over 5 million and one for a project of about 140,000. So we would leave that decision as far as attractiveness of the project up to the applicant, with the understanding that, there's a lot of opportunity in that application for you to state the point or state why this project is so important. Why do you need to spend $5 million on this project over here? Or gee, why can we get away with spending only 150,000 over there? Unfortunately, we don't let the applicants come in and make a presentation at the review meetings. Instead, what we do is we have in the Office of Economic Development, we have some grant coordinators who will be working with you, and they'll have that chat, they'll have that discussion with you as far as is the project, I don't want to say not, is a project feasible for funding from our standpoint. But generally, no project's too big and no project's too small. We can make, if you can help us make a case for it, I think we can get there. Is that your experience? Oh, no, the $5 million project though, we might ask to spread out over a couple of years because of that $20 million budget limitation. So we may be looking at a phased program, which is what Calhaven Trail was, and what a couple of them around here were.
I would just add to kind of go back to Michael and Don's point, $20 million isn't that much, but then we're only buying out 40 million in the buyout. That's the entire TAP program. So when we talk about pushing $2 billion worth of federal aid, and the law all for that buyout process is only $40 million a year in a couple of years, it's a really small amount of potentially of the entire federal aid process.
I think somewhere in the last 15 minutes, I skipped over an important term that when I was talking about dollar amounts that are available to the program right now, it's current $20 million. I think Steve mentioned, I think you mentioned that your program is looking for a bump of
Yeah, it's
50 some percent or something like
No,
that.
well, just for 22, it went up 50%. So,
Okay.
yeah. And then 2% added on each year after that.
Okay, but under IIJA or Bill Act or whatever the new legislation is called, it's been suggested to us that the TAP program is going to receive another 50 or so percent of funds. So that takes that 20 million up to 30 million. It's not a set aside. Some folks have some issues with taking $30 million and putting it off into streetscapes or bike paths. I don't have that issue because of this and because of the health issue, because of the health benefits and because of the quality of life improvements. So that I think it's gonna be 30 million well spent.
One more question. I think this should be easier. There's a kind of an insider's term that's being thrown around, this buyback or buyout. Someone like me who's from a nonprofit, bike-oriented organization, I haven't been exposed to that term. Can you please define that?
Now, the question was, can I explain a little bit more about the buyout or buyback program? I can talk all day long on that, but only for about that, but only about that much. Yes, only about that much might be worthwhile listening to. The buyout or the buyback program is an offer. It's signed into state law by the governor here the day before yesterday, where MDOT can buy back a portion or all of the federal aid allotted to each local agency for 90 cents on a dollar. So in other words, if a road commission gets $100,000 and they want to sell that federal aid to MDOT, MDOT will give the county $90,000, take the obligation authority resulting from that $100,000, we'll spend it on a trunk line project. What happens though is that road commission has that $90,000. They still need to do the project that that the original fund. With a whole lot of strings attached, because now all of a sudden that $90,000 is local money. Okay, so because it's local, we don't need to go through the Davis-Bacon or a lot of the other reporting requirements that that are attached right here with all these strings. Strings kind of get lessened.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can probably do it, or you can bid it faster because you can bid it on your own. You can probably get the project designed. I'm going out on a limb. Get the project designed, constructed, and closed out in 1 year rather than 2.5 years, maybe with me. So yeah, there's a lot of benefit to that. But the program is capped at 20. There's a limitation. There's a dollar amount in the bill of 25 million for the first year, 35 for the second year, and 45 for the years after that. We've already gotten some requests from some local agencies to have MDOT buy out their funds. I don't know where we are as of 9 o'clock this morning, but as of late yesterday afternoon, we're already into the millions of dollars that local agencies were getting in line to request aid on.
It'll go really fast.
Oh yeah,
Really fast.
Well, a lot of strings attached. We touched on some of them. My presumption is that Murphy's Law is going to hold into play here. 5 minutes after I get done, somebody's going to have a question, or 15 minutes after we leave, somebody's going to have a question. So there's our contact information. Are we making these presentations available?
We can.
Okay. Any questions? Any comments? If not, I appreciate you listening. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
All right.
Ryan, you're up.
While Ryan walks, I'll answer Mark's question from earlier about how much. So I pulled it up in our plan. So entire area gets a little over $40 million worth of MTF funds. So Act 51 state funds, a little over $40 million. For us to bring just the MPOs federal aid system, so that does not include the local road system, to a PACER rating of 8, which is a good road, right? In 10 years, would take about $60 million a year, just for the federal aid. So we know that that 40-ish million that we get for all the agencies includes snow plowing and other maintenance and other costs. So we're still at a huge, disparity there between costs.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, and I want to take a second here and thank Bruce and Steve for being here, for taking the time today to share the information with us here. We really appreciate you guys being here today to help all of us understand this a little bit better. I'm Ryan Minkus, County Engineer with the Road Commission here. I wanted to take a few minutes here today to kind of update you guys on some stuff we've been doing here at the Road Commission related to non-motorized. So the Road Commission has been working in complete streets capacity and non-motorized for a number of years. We've been supporting complete streets by working with our locals for when we do road projects, whether it's on the primary or local system, approaching those officials and asking them at that time if they want to incorporate non-motorized facilities in on those projects. We do partner with the locals as well because we understand you guys have a better idea of what your community needs are. So we are looking to you to help us identify where these sort of non-motorized efforts are needed as well. And as all of us here are part of, CATS, some other planning organizations, we're all in some way, shape, or form involved with planning and looking at regional aspects and connectivity with these sorts of facilities as well. So Road Commission's not different than any of you guys in that aspect either. More specifically to us, we've been supporting non-motorized efforts in more locally here. PA 51, Public Act 51 and 1951 requires that we spend not less than 1% of our Michigan transportation revenue on non-motorized facilities. So we've been averaging since 2011, 5.9%, almost 6 times over the minimum requirement in that regard. So just as an example, in 2020, we spent $2.7 million on non-motorized facilities within our network. In 2020, if we had only gone for that 1% minimum requirement, we would have only spent $270,000. Annually here as well, we've been taking under an effort called Put the Brakes on Fatalities. So this is a program that encourages kids to create posters kind of highlighting safety. And then we have age categories set up for that program. And the board reviews all the entries that come in and selects winners for each age category. And we've had some generous donors over the past few years who've supplied us with bikes and bike helmets. So we've been able to award to the winners in each age category. Again, trying to help promote both bicycling and safety on the roads. And over the past couple of years here, we've been partnering with biking groups to help promote Bike Week as it comes up in the community. Some accomplishments we've had here over the past couple of years. Bruce mentioned the Texas Township Trail. We did receive an award in 2016 from the American Public Works Association, a project of the year for quality of life for that project. So that was really great for Texas Township. We've had some non-motorized agreements that have come into place. A number of these are umbrella agreements, so the townships don't have to come back to us each time a project wants to go in. We have those in Kalamazoo, Oshkomo, and Texas townships. We've partnered with the Kalamazoo River Valley Trail on all but the section that went through downtown Kalamazoo. We've gotten an agreement with recently with the city of Kalamazoo and the Village of Schoolcraft as well. And it looks like it cut a little bit off of here, but some efforts we've been taking under when we do road projects is widening, right? So there's a couple things we do when we widen shoulders and we widen lanes. When we widen the shoulders, it provides more space for those non-motorized users along the roadway. When we widen lanes, it provides more room for the motorized vehicles to navigate around those users on the edge of the road. So we're trying to make sure we're providing space for both to operate safely and efficiently. So some quick updates here for 2022. Steve had mentioned the Metropolitan plan for the CATS. It was recently adopted here for 2050. It does require a minimum 20-year planning horizon for that. did include, as Steve mentioned, a non-motorized chapter, which was great. There was a subcommittee that was put together to help put that chapter together and vet plans like you see here in the background for existing and future connectivity within the MPO. This chapter is used as a guide to help CAT staff direct the planning process whenever we're looking at projects within the MPO. So having gone through that, the Road Commission took it upon ourselves over this past year to look and develop a plan for ourselves. So where do we start with that? For us, everything starts with safety. Safety, safety, safety. As you can see here from the picture, looks like crashes have been happening for a long time. So unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get away from them. They do provide us with information. So we have to use that. All right. So when we're looking at crashes, we look at the type of crash, the frequency, the severity, and the location. When you pull all these factors together, it can kind of help you start narrowing down where you might want to look to put sorts of facilities to make sure that they're safe. Additionally, we want to look at routing. We want to make sure that the routes are desired and would be used by the users. I know over the past few years here, there have been a number of efforts locally. There was efforts that went into the CATS 45 Metropolitan Plan. Kalamazoo Bicycle Club had put together a preferred bike routes map. We looked at those efforts and pulled them in and looked at where these routes were being identified by users. We then wanted to look at spacing. We wanted to make sure there were adequate north, south, east, west routes. We didn't want them too close. So it was trying to identify what made sense from a routing standpoint. And then additionally, we want to look at connectivity. We know townships, cities, even neighboring counties may have plans. We want to make sure whatever we were looking at as routing, for routing, made sure we were taking into account and accommodating those connections or future connections. Then we want to look at traffic features. And I think most of us, I'm assuming everybody here took a car into the office here for the presentation, are used to this as motorized drivers, right? When we're on a road, we can sense the volume, the mix of traffic, if there's commercial traffic in with passenger cars, and the overall speed. All of those things play into a factor with the non-motorized effort here. So when we're looking at routes, we want to look at the road with these characteristics in mind as well. And finally, we want to look at the roadway features. So for us, we want to look at the class of road. So is it a primary or a local road? Each of those serves a different purpose. So we want to make sure it aligns for what we're looking at. And for road conditions, we want to see like what is adjacent to the road. Is there a shoulder there? Is there not? Is there a guardrail? Is it right up against the asphalt where there's no room for a non-motorized user? Are there rumble strips? We know that's an issue for bicyclists. So we don't want to put these routes on roads where there's already something that would be a concern. Topography. We do know, and we've heard from road riders on bicycles that they like hills, right? I know motorists don't like those hills because they can't always see where the bicyclists are. So we needed to try to strike a balance where everybody could kind of be accommodated. We're not going to eliminate and only find flat routes throughout the county. We're not that flat. So, and finally, we want to look at barriers. In the picture here, you can kind of see a lake off to the left. So we need to make sure we can get people around certain barriers. Additional barriers are like highways and rivers. They're usually only certain points you can cross those. So we want to make sure we're utilizing those crossing points to make sure we can maintain connectivity throughout the county. So where did that leave us? We kind of arrived at this map here. This map, we're not going to get into a lot of detail. I'm going to give you some more information on it here in a second. Just a high level here, you can kind of see it does touch all 15 townships in the county. It touches all the cities and villages with the highlighted routes. So we're making sure we're hitting that connectivity and keeping everything connected and joining everything. This map here, the highlighted routes represent 183 miles of our road network. So much like the CATS non-motorized chapter, this non-motorized route map will serve RCKC staff as a tool when we're planning projects. You can find this map on our webpage. So if you go right to the webpage, KalamazooCountyRoads.com, there is a button here for non-motorized, and the map and all the non-motorized information we have is available right on that page. So it's really easy to find and get to just by heading to our homepage. And so I do want to let you know that we are in the next day or two going to be sending out a notification for our non-motorized 102, which Bruce had mentioned about how if you're going for TAP funds, you need to work with the road commission. So 102 is going to go into a little bit more detail on our policy, our agreements, and our application, and what needs to happen if you need to work with us on getting non-motorized implemented in your community. So with that, I'm available for questions, and if you've thought of anything in the brief time I was up here that you want to ask Steve and Bruce, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer your questions as well.
We have a trail in the township that was built by MDOT about 20 years ago, and we can't spend money on it because we don't own it. And MDOT won't do anything about getting us to us. Suggestions on what we need to do.
So to summarize the question, there was a trail built by MDOT. It's not your trail, is that what you're saying? You can't get to it, you're trying to find, or you
There's
can't?
no ownership right now.
Okay, there's no ownership of it, so you're trying to figure out how to
It
get.
needs to be maintained, and we know that, and we're willing to do it, but we've been told by legal, we can't spend any money, township money, because we don't have ownership of it.
Your legal saying you don't have legal ownership, so you can't spend money, so you're asking for any
And
guidance
I've
on how to
tried
get
for 10
funding?
years to do my annual email to get someone to work from MDOT, and I got nothing. Just wondering
do-
if anybody had any, even in the room, suggestions on who to contact. Because, I mean, there's funds out there maybe can help us maintain it. I mean, it's already built. I'm sure all the easements are all done. We just need to improve it. You know, routes are coming up through, we know we need to do it. The little things for ADA were done a few years ago by MDOT. But they won't give us the little piece of paper that says it's now yours, so we can spend our funds on it.
So similar situation with the city of Kalamazoo has one along Stadium Drive that was built in a similar fashion. City of Kalamazoo took over that section though, so it's theirs now. So that's a big difference there, so they can fix it. But I believe we're talking Gull Road from H North up to the village, basically, or close to the village. Yeah, because it's showing its age last time I was out there, so it
And they
needs repair.
just did, when they did the roundabout, they did some connections, some
Right.
improvements.
Yeah, they're required to do their ADA connections there, and part of the issue might be cost involved because it would probably be considered substandard at this point. You know, as Bruce mentioned, width and clearances and everything. So there might be some issues there. Could be why there isn't an investment on that side, but Bruce will
I can
bang the
check.
gong back at the
And
office.
we've tried a lot of resources. I mean, they wanted us to sign something that says you can have it. Well, you're giving us something that's now 20 years old. You know, so we're like, we need an agreement that says, you know, this is what needs to happen. And, you know, so we can apply for funds to bring it up to, you know, whether MDOT, because they have their own funds, can they bring it up to code and we'll apply with them and it's up and then we got it from now on. This is, we're stuck and we've been trying to get this and can't get any resolution from anyone. I mean, I talked to Steve the other day, I said, is this, would it qualify? Yeah, but we don't own it.
Right.
So we can't do anything.
And
with it.
I would need some more information, but I can.
Steve knows the
Yeah, I
path.
know what you're talking about.
Can we
Yeah,
talk
can
about it?
Yep.
Tomorrow or Monday or something?
That'd be great.
So,
Awesome. Thank you.
sounds like we'll try to get some more information at least, so.
No promises.
Oh, I know. Like I said, I've been working on it for
Bruce
10
has
years.
$20 million. He just said so.
You did say strings attached.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yes.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, because that's an MDOT program, the TAP would not work, right? Because that's Act 51 money.
Well, no, the TAP wouldn't have worked because in the previous bill, but didn't IIJA repeal? Because TAP was only allowable for local agencies. It's
Right.
MDOT administered. So it comes into, in the previous authorizations, it would be tricky to do facilities because you have to have a local buy-in to be the agent, basically, if it's along trunk line. And we have that Village of Lawton has a project right now going along trunk line. So you can do it. You just have to do a little more. But previously, MDOT could not be a recipient of those funds without that local buy-in. But I want to say that IIJA took that out, didn't they?
I'm not sure.
We'll have to double check on that too, because that might be if that becomes allowable, that might be another solution there somewhere.
I don't know how it went in before, but I know now when stuff's going out, like all agreements have to be in place before. So newer stuff, all the township, everybody's signing agreements
Right.
before a shovel gets in the ground to know who's taking care of what and when. And
Sign agreements for like 200 feet, you know? No, it's a whole, you know, you guys built it. And from what I understand, what we do understand was it was built in 2002 before MDOT ever started those agreements with the local. So they don't know how to go back prior to that and come up with something.
And real quick to your point on like upgrading the ADA stuff, when we do road projects with the federal funds, we're required to make sure at least the ADA ramps are up to current standards. So that's why those are getting updated as projects go through, but then not expanding to anything else.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, as a bicyclist, that's a real important connector from Kalamazoo, which is,
It's great.
Yeah, we understand that, but you know, we have been very lucky that Zoetis or Kaiser has owned the road, and they have maintained that section of it as long as they have, because that part is not as bad. But in front of the homes and stuff, I mean, we've had tree falls down, we've had to do a few, but our legal says be very careful about, because we don't own it. So be very careful about what we can spend our own public money on.
Marcia, I'll put a hook in and say, we're gonna do our darndest to get you an answer, but you gotta come to 102 to find out. That's my pitch.
That's okay. Hey, that's, I'll come back, no problem.
The safe passing distance. They are available in the lobby. Anybody here from a jurisdiction or an office who can have a spot to put them out during bike week or for the whole season. I'm sure you're welcome to their taking one. Just a quick plug from the chair of Kalamazoo Bike Week. Me.
Any other questions?
Ryan, you mentioned the Kalamazoo Road Commission's map of its non-motorized master plan. Are there any efforts right now to get money to implement that master plan from any sources, COVID, or anything like that?
So the question for everybody in the video audience is being asked is that we had showed our map of our routes that we had selected for the road commission and wanted to know if there was any funding being sought for implementing that map. And the answer to that is yes. The county, Kalamazoo County, has put forward ARPA funds in the form of grants that agencies can apply for, and the road commission has applied for a $5 million grant to help us implement some of those routes. So we have requested support from townships for our application to the county for those funds. So applications haven't been completed and finalized and turned in yet, but we're hopeful. Any other questions? I said I had some great questions today, so I appreciate you all coming out.
And if you think of more questions, there's a 102 coming up where you can bring those questions.
And I was just gonna say, looking forward to seeing you at 102. So Mark.
Marshall will be there. And there are a few donuts left, so if everybody grabs one on the way out, we won't have any leftovers.
Yeah, Brian, as someone who has worked with the road commission of Kalamazoo County even before it had that name, starting in 2012, on the map that Mike just referenced. On behalf of Bike Friendly Kalamazoo, I want to thank you for the efforts you're making to implement this community developed regional bike route network. And the reason I'm taking time to mention this is I'm fresh from the National Bike Summit that the League of Michigan, or American Bicyclists put on, starting since Sunday and ending just yesterday. We can be very proud in this area that we have one of, if not the largest, regional bike route networks in the country. Total, it's something like 380 centerline miles, if you take into account Van Buren County. As we're implementing it, we can talk about it, and we are, and we're very proud of it, and the role that the road commission is now playing in building it out. So I just want to put a mention to everybody that this is something special. And especially in light of the 2016 Kalamazoo bike tragedy, anything we can do to bring a light, a bright, happy light into what we're doing for non-motorized in this area, I think will pay dividends for the quality of life for everybody here in the county and beyond to the MPO. And we're setting the example for the nation, by the way, because as I go to a conference like this, I'm mentioning the great work that we're doing in this area, and it's attracting attention. So thank you again. And thanks for hosting 102 when we can learn more about it.
Thank you, Paul.
So thank you, everybody, for coming. I know both these guys have staff who were super helpful in answering questions too. If you guys think of questions afterwards, don't hesitate to reach out to us here at the Road Commission as well, and we'll see what we can do to help. But thank you for coming.